Danny Kowalski had never known a life without grease under his fingernails. Every morning before the sun came up, he was already at the garage, listening to engines the way other men listened to music. Carefully, patiently, hearing every note that was out of place. He was a mechanic in a small town, where nobody got rich and nobody complained about it either. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of small moments to change lives, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness True Stories. Also, tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from. But Danny carried something heavier than poverty. He carried a promise. His younger brother Marcus had died 2 years ago, whispering the same words in a hospital bed. Don't let people lose hope, Danny, that's all. Don't let them lose hope. Danny had nodded, held Marcus's hand until it went still, and driven home in silence. He hadn't cried until his 8-year-old daughter, Zoe, climbed into his lap and said, "It's okay, Dad, we still have each other." That was the moment he understood what the promise truly meant. It didn't mean grand gestures. It meant showing up, every single day, even when it hurt, even when no one was watching. Lexi Donovan had been watching the world from a corner office for 15 years. She had built a technology company from nothing, survived a marriage that fell apart quietly, like a house no one bothered to repair, and raised a daughter largely alone despite the army of nannies and specialists and therapists she could afford. Her daughter Sienna was 11 years old and had not walked in 3 of those years. A car accident, the kind that happens in seconds and reshapes everything, had left Sienna with partial paralysis in both legs. Doctors had tried. Surgeons had tried. Physical therapists had tried. Lexi had spent over $2 million trying, and every morning she watched Sienna strap on her rigid medical brace and move through the world with a quiet dignity that broke her mother's heart. Completely. Lexi smiled for meetings and gave keynote speeches about resilience and innovation, and came home at night to sit outside Sienna's door and listen to her daughter breathe. Grateful she was alive, gutted by guilt she never spoke aloud. The car that brought Lexi to Danny's garage was a rental that gave out on the highway near his town on a Tuesday afternoon. She had Sienna in the back seat. She called 3 garages before one answered. Danny answered. He came out himself, towed the car back, and got to work without ceremony. Lexi sat in the waiting area on a plastic chair that had seen better decades, and Sienna sat beside her, brace visible beneath her rolled-up jeans. Danny came in to give an update on the repair and stopped. He didn't stare. He didn't make it obvious, but he knelt down to hand Sienna a glass of water from the cooler and said quietly, almost to himself, "That brace is sitting wrong. It's pressing on the tibial nerve. That's hurting her, isn't it?" It wasn't quite a question. Sienna looked at her mother. Lexi looked at this mechanic with oil on his hands and skepticism in her chest. "She has specialists," Lexi said. Danny nodded. "I know. I'm just saying what I see." He went back to work. But something had shifted in the room, the way pressure shifts before a storm. Lexi asked questions before she left. Danny answered honestly. He had no medical degree. He had spent 4 years reading everything he could find about prosthetics and orthotics after a friend. Lost a leg and received poor aftercare. He had built small prototypes in the back of the garage after hours alone. Nothing professional. Nothing funded. Just a man who couldn't stop thinking about a problem. Lexi took his number and told herself she would not call it. She called it 3 days later. What followed was not smooth. It was full of friction and distrust and a lawsuit threat when an early prototype caused Sienna to fall and bruise her knee badly. Lexi arrived at the garage furious, ready to end everything. Danny sat across from her and said, "I understand, but I'm not going to stop unless you tell me to, because I think I'm close." There was something in his voice, not arrogance, certainty, the kind that comes from doing something for love rather than profit. Lexi didn't tell him to stop. 6 months later, in the back of a garage that smelled like rubber and motor oil, Sienna Donovan stood up from her chair, took 3 steps forward and burst into tears. Danny was already turned away. He had his hand over his mouth. Zoe, who had sat through dozens of late nights with her homework spread on a workbench, quietly took her father's hand. The video Lexi posted that evening received 40 Million views in 72 hours. Reporters arrived. Offers arrived. Danny declined the offers. He accepted one partnership with a non-profit to open a small mobility center, where he now works with people insurance companies have given up on. Sienna volunteers there on weekends. Lexi restructured her foundation entirely. She told a journalist recently that the most important thing she had ever built was not her company. Danny still drives the same truck, still answers calls before sunrise, still keeps his brother's promise the only way he knows how, by refusing, absolutely and stubbornly and without exception, to let people lose hope. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Kindness True Stories, where every story reminds us that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things. Your support helps us keep sharing these moments with the world.